Hello. Yeah, so I'm feeling a little bit better today, but I'm still not very well. So I certainly won't be in on Thursday. So because of the snow outside, I don't know if Thursday's going to happen in terms of the university. But so I'm going to give you two more videos for the first video. Now we're going to do a slightly shorter second video, and the third video will be slightly longer. So if you remember, on the last video, I left you on a cliffhanger where we had just finished about looking at gross domestic product from the point of view of sales in terms of what are people buying, and people are buying the elements of GDP. The people that are buying it are the people that are domestically consuming it. You know, people in the shops and buying cars and all sorts of internet services, things like that. Then there's the private companies that are investing in maybe other goods to buying raw materials to make them into sort of other goods or investing in new factories, shops, startups, that type of thing. And then obviously that you've got the government spending, which is all the things that the government is buying or consuming. And then you've got the final part, which is the balance of trade, the amount of exports minus the amount of imports. Now we're going to look at, because remember when we said at the beginning that GDP, we could work out GDP from what is produced or what is bought. So what is supplied and what is demand. Now at equilibrium, they should be equal. So what we're going to look at now is the other way of looking at this from the point of view of production um, or supply. So basically GDP measured by what is produced. And so if you think about it, if we try to just sort of look at the economy and break it up into what is produced, you're going to have five main parts. You're going to have durable goods, goods that are long lasting, things that you buy and they're going to be there for a good few years, cars, refrigerators, things like that. And then you've got your sort of non-durable goods, which are more short-lived, your food and your clothing. We're not talking about even services now. We're talking about those sorts of things that you're going to buy, but only going to last for a little while. Some food, some clothing, you know, those sorts of things. Now, then this is the line between non-durable goods and services sometimes can be a bit blurry, but services are what are called intangible things. Goods are physical things, but they may be long-lived or short-lived. Services are going to be things like entertainment, healthcare, education. And if you think about it, a lot of your spending is on those things. Yeah, everyone wants to have a bit left on their pay packet at the end of the month to buy some nice durable goods, some physical things. But the reality is, so much of our spending is on non-durable goods and services. Your Wi-Fi, all the your Netflix, all these sorts of things. Education, what you're paying to be here, for example. Then you've got structures. Obviously, those are your residents where you live, your factory, office building, retail store. Obviously, private investors are getting factories and office buildings, retail stores, but obviously, domestic consumers are buying residences. And so those are the four main categories. Now, the fifth is an interesting one, and that's inventories. Now, we said that at equilibrium, supply should equal demand. But obviously, equilibrium is a theoretical concept that we often don't reach. And so, the end of the year, you know, uh, factories and all sorts of companies would have produced all these things that they then do not sell in that year and that will come over, this is in accountancy terms, to the next year. So inventories are really unsold products, things that have been produced but have not been bought. But theoretically, they may be sold in the future. So theoretically, if that inventory bit sort of makes up for where supply doesn't equal demand. So theoretically, um, that GDP should be the same if we measure it through production, the production method, or we measure it through the um, demand sales method. Um, and yeah, and so we can look at it the same. We can look at it like, remember we had that pie chart for all the in terms of the demand side of GDP. Now, when we think about the production side, we have a similar thing. Services, 60.8%. Um, that's a big one. The biggest part of the American economy is services. Um, then you've got uh, durable goods, 16.7, all these physical things, cars and refrigerators, machines, all that sort of thing. Structures is 9.1%. Part of me would think, oh, it should be more than that, so much building and stuff, but it's not actually that big, though it's a very key part of the economy, as we'll see later on. And then you've got non-durable goods, 13.4%. And normally inventories are not so much of a big one, because yeah, generally there isn't much wastage in the economy, because people know their markets, they know what they can get away with selling. Okay, and so if you look at it again, we look at how this has changed over time. That services have gone up massively since the Second World War, where and this is some of the things you hear about, where durable goods, the making of physical things, has seemed to have sort of declined. We hear about that, but in reality, that's a small decline, where it's actually non-durable goods, food and clothing has actually gone down. That could be a reflection of the fact that so much clothing, non-durable stuff, is actually brought from it is imported these days. But the big thing we see since the Second World War has been this rise in services, from like less than 40% in 1950, to over 60% of the economy by 2016. And that's been the incredible structural change in the US economy and a lot of Western economies since the Second World War. And it's interesting that sort of housing, you know, was a big part of the economy, probably like 12, 13%. It's actually become less. And actually, one of the reasons it's become less, well, I was a bit surprised by that 9.1% number, is actually you can see that it dropped after the 2008 crisis. Up to 2008, people were buying homes, and so many homes, so much money was being pumped into the housing market. Mortgages were cheap. Now, after the 2008 crisis, less and less houses are being built, and it's slowly sort of rising again. Yeah. Okay, so just before this, before we sort of move on, there's a couple more things we want to look at, but we want to look at the problem of double counting. So if you think about it, we want to only count each transaction twice. And there is always a danger of bringing in intermediate goods, because there's often a lot of trades that are going on, a lot of economic activity that is about intermediate goods. For example, if you're building a car, and then you buy the wheels for the car, you buy the glass for the car, you buy the steel for the car. Now, if then you count the car in sales, and you count all those, the steel and the glass and the wheels, then you're double counting. That car is effectively entering the economic figures twice, when it's only really sold for once. And so somehow with GDP accounting, you've got to not double count. So there's a lot of work done to make sure that it's only final goods and services that are actually counted in the figures. Um, yeah. Good. Okay. So that's the important one. There'll be a lot of questions maybe in the exam about, you know, some that's look at this question, and it's like, okay, is everything being counted once? It's like, for example, if you sell a used car, you know, that's not really part of the GDP figures because that's already entered the GDP figures when it was originally sold. You know, maybe any mortgage around a used car will be enter the services, but you can't, you can't, the car itself can't enter into the GDP twice. Same with a lot of things like maybe, the US company buys loads of aluminium from another company, and they may even spend hundreds of millions of dollars on that. But the reality is they're going to make that into aluminium into something else that they're going to then sell on. So that you can't count it twice. Now, we're going to just quickly look before we finish this video on some other ways to measure the economy. Now, gross domestic product is very good. It's a quick and easy way of working out a nation's economy, but it's not perfect because if you think about it, there's a lot of foreigners who own companies in the US. Now, and those companies that would enter the figures for gross domestic product of the US, but maybe the profits are going to a company that's based in another country. And the same, obviously, American capital owns companies in other countries, and so how do you account for that? Um, uh, and so you sometimes some say gross domestic product's fine, yeah. A certain percentage of stuff is owned in the US by foreigners, but then an equal amount is owned by US companies in other places. So it sort of cancels each other out. Others would say you need a specific thing that brings this up. And so that's the whole idea of gross national products. It includes what is produced domestically and what is produced by domestic labor and business abroad in a year. So it's sort of American companies in the US and American companies all around the world. That would be gross national product as opposed to gross domestic product. There won't be that many questions on this, but it's good to know the different definitions. Now, there's also this called net national product, because yes, you could have this amazing GDP, but everything could be sort of being run down in a negative way, or you could be really sort of messing up the environment or something like that. So things like net national product tries to bring that in. So because depreciation happens to any physical good, like bridges, roads, factories, they all start to get weaker over time, and as they age and they lose their value, you have what is called net national product, which is gross national product minus depreciation, and that can be sort of even taken further. And then gross national income is all the values and goods, services produced by people from a country, whether in the country or not. So these are all attempts to reach the wider questions of where people from a particular country are based and where they're making their money. And also there's questions of how do you factor into depreciation, because an economy could be making loads of stuff, but it could not be investing in its future. And the sort of net national product tries to sort of look at that. Okay, so this is the end of the second video, and I will meet you in the third video.